Okay. Quick introduction of myself. My name is Asher. I'm a social worker working at Limitless, and today's training or masterclass is about trauma. What is it, and how can I help? Right. So a little bit of an introduction about myself. I'm a trauma trained practitioner with uh, with training in both EMDR as well as trauma focused CBT. Right. And I've been practicing social work for quite a number of years already. Yeah. I specialize in working with young people, especially young people who struggle with mental health issues. Yeah. So with that said, let's begin. Before I even continue though, I would like to kind of introduce you to our app. You might have seen this on screen earlier on. And this app is really an introduction to depression. Now, I know we're talking about trauma, but today, right, I also kind of want to introduce you to this app that we've developed. It's called A Day in the Life. And really, the whole premise of this app is to help you understand what a day in the life of a youth struggling with depression looks like. Right? Sometimes we can't understand and sometimes we can't relate, but this is really to help you put yourself in that shoes. Yeah. So that said, maybe just give you like 5 seconds to whip up your phones and scan the you know. But other than that, let me just kind of type in the download link as well. I hope this is the correct one. But please let me know if it's the wrong one. I'll find the right one for you later on. Okay, so with that said, let's begin. If you have Instagram or TikTok, do connect with us at we.r.limitless or limitless.sg. You see my face a lot on our TikTok channel. But other than that, right, I think it's good content. Yeah. So this today's topic really, today's program deals with the topic of trauma. Yeah, and some of the material presented may be difficult to process or may bring back memories of painful times in the past. Now, at this point in time, if you feel uncomfortable, please feel free to step out at any point in time, turn off your camera. I know most of you have your cameras off, which is fine, right? And come back 5 minutes later, okay? Do also be open to dropping me a private message if you feel uncomfortable, and we can kind of stay back a little on later to kind of talk a little bit about it if you need that support. Yeah. Now, today's masterclass has also been designed to help you understand trauma, right? And maybe contain some segments on how to help people, right? But it does not qualify you to become a therapist or a counselor, right? So please don't treat this as a therapy training session. Okay? Now, with that said, not tomorrow, today's Wednesday, right? This Friday is our Ask Me Anything. So if you would like to if you like to ask a question to the different speakers that you've seen over the past couple of days, please feel free to reach out to us via our Padlet at padlet.com/outreach40/TLR masterclass. Right, so let me just put this in the chat as well. Padlet.com/outreach40/TLR masterclass. Don't mind my slow typing. I hope that's the correct one. Okay, so let's talk about trauma. Now, what is trauma? I think the reality is that sometimes trauma is a very overused word. Like, oh no, I got traumatized by this, I got traumatized by that. But in actuality, we might be onto something, right? So today I kind of want to encourage you to think about trauma as something that affects many of us. Yeah, many of us. So what is trauma, right? What is trauma? But before I talk about all that, right, before I discuss what is trauma, I would like you to just remember three things today. These three things are super important, right? These three things are the basis of everything I'll be speaking about. And if you can only remember three things today, right, then remember these three things. Okay, so the first thing I want you to kind of remember is this, that the very first thing to remember is that the underlying question when you are working, speaking, surviving, cohabitating, living with, right, someone with traumatic symptoms is not what is wrong with you, right? It's not what is wrong with you, it is what happened to you. You know, very often our response to someone who has a traumatic response or traumatic symptoms is, what's wrong with you? Why you always like that one? Right? Why do you always do these kind of things? Why you never learn? Right? So that's sometimes the questions that we ask, and I've been guilty of that as well. But I would like to encourage you to think about it from a different perspective. Sometimes people with trauma or have experienced trauma in the past respond in very, you know, awkward, aggressive sometimes, you know, unconventional ways, and you know, sometimes it can come up as, you know, risky behavior. Sometimes it can come out as aggression. Sometimes it can come out as someone wanting to escape and run away from every single thing, right? But the underlying question would not be or should not be what is wrong with you. It should be, hey, what happened? Would you like to talk about it and can I help? All right. The next thing is this, right? That symptoms are adaptations to traumatic events. What do I mean by that? It just simply means this, that sometimes all this quote unquote bad behavior, right, actually are not abnormal behavior, but it is normal behavior in an abnormal situation. A perfect example of this would be a young child or someone who grows up in a very aggressive environment, right? An environment whereby, you know, the father beats the mother or the father beats him or her, right? That person will grow in to become a very aggressive person because that is how that person survives in that situation, right? So trauma symptoms, they are normal responses in an abnormal situation, and we need to see it for the abnormal situation and not for that quote unquote abnormal response. Yeah. But the final thing is this, right? That healing happens in relationships. Healing happens in relationships. And to me, that is so important, right? I don't mean that healing happens in a relationship with a therapist, right? It doesn't just happen in a relationship with a counselor or a psychologist, right? Healing happens in relationships with you, with me, right? And it doesn't matter what kind of relationship you have. It could be a friend, you could be maybe a leader or a youth leader, right? It could be, you know, a colleague, you could be a classmate, you could be a parent, you could be a family member. Healing can happen in the relationship with you. And the key word in that situation is empathy. Now, right now, I'm going to be showing you a very quick video, right? And I would like you to respond in the chat later on about one thing that you caught from that video. Okay? So let me just stop share and turn on that video.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Right. So we just heard a very, very quick sharing by Dr. Brené Brown. Right, and what I would love for you to do is to quickly just type into the chat that one thing that you caught from that very quick video. Right, it could just be a one sentence thing, it could be a one paragraph thing. Just quickly just type into the chat what you just caught. Okay. Connections make everything better. All right, that's true. That's very, very true. Rarely can a response make something better. Yeah, right. Titus, K, you guys got it right. Back to back. Connections make everything better, and rarely can a response make something better. Yeah. Empathy is a choice, a vulnerable choice, and that's awesome. You don't have to silver lining it. Yeah. You know, have real, truthful, unreserved connection. I love that. Yeah, connection is a key component to empathy. Sympathy drives this connection. You know, that tells me that being sympathetic is a top-down thing. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I love how it was presented in that video, right? Whereby, you know, sympathy was presented as like, ooh, that looks bad, right? And you're looking down, but empathy, you know, is presented by going down into that deep, dark place, right? And just being there. And I would like to just add on to what, you know, Dr. Brené Brown shared in that video, and that would be this, that very often when we think about empathy, you know, is not about having the right answers. Empathy is just being there, putting yourself in that person's shoes and trying your very best, right, to understand or to feel or to, you know, to figure out what they're going through. Yeah. And you're right, KH, that the other person's perspective is valid as well. Yeah. I don't know what to say, you know, but I'm so glad that you shared it with me. When we think about it from that perspective, I would also like to add on another thing about, like, you know, silver lining. So sometimes we're right, you know, we like to silver line things, and myself included. We try to look at it from the best perspective or a positive perspective. But the reality is that that's not the reality for that person. And sometimes, while we are trying to silver lining it for that person, you know, it could be that we're not even trying to soothe the person. We're trying to soothe ourselves by providing them with an answer. We're trying to help ourselves feel that, oh, maybe this person's situation is not as bad, therefore we can deal with it. Yeah. And Veron says that sometimes people just want you to feel with them. And that's absolutely correct. You know, when we think about healing that happens in a relationship, it doesn't happen because you have the right answers, guys. It doesn't happen because you have the right advice, right? It happens because you walk out that relationship with that person. It happens because you are there to give them a hug when they need a hug. You are there to sit down with them and have coffee with them when they need their coffee time, right? You are there to hear them out, you know, and provide a space for them to safely talk about their issues. And when we think about it from that perspective, healing happens not in a relationship whereby I'm teaching you, I'm correcting you, I'm training you, I'm getting you better, right? No, it happens in a relationship whereby you are willing to walk that journey with that person. Yeah, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Right, I think I've said it like 5 times this week already, across the different master classes, but I believe that so much, guys. All right, so let's continue. So what is trauma? All right, so what is trauma? Now, trauma is simply, right, something that results from an event or a series of events that we naturally see as emotionally harmful or physically harmful. Yeah. So we think about it from this perspective. We think about it from 3 E's. Okay, 1, 2, 3 E's. Okay, first E is event or series of events. Second E is experienced as physically or emotionally harmful or even life-threatening. Right, and the third E is that there is an effect, right? Sometimes it's a short-term effect, sometimes it's a long-term effect. And when we think about that, right, you know, actually, trauma can be many things, right? It can be many things. It could be something as simple as getting, getting fat, something very bad for a long period of time. So series of events, right? That's physically harmful for me. Like for example, I always talk about how I don't eat soup with bihun anymore, right? If I'm given a choice, unless I have to eat it to survive, I will not eat soup with bihun. Why? Because of that event or series of events that I went through during NS, whereby during my BMT, right, all we were fed for like, maybe 2 or 3 times a week for the entire 4 months, right? That was in BMT, was bihun in water, right, with a bit of salt, right? And it was a terrible experience. Up to now, I still don't want to think about it, right? But there's a series of events. But what about an event, right? So let's think about it from this perspective. Now I have with me a little paintbrush here, right? So think about it from this perspective that I have this paintbrush here with me, right? Imagine that it's a branch. Now it's a branch on a tree. Yeah, let's bring it a bit closer to me. Yeah, a branch on a tree. And imagine that I put a 10 kg weight on this. The branch will start to bend. Yeah. And if I put a 20 kg weight on top of the 10 kg, it will bend even more. And if I put one more, maybe like 30 kg weight, what will happen is that the branch will start to splinter, right? And start to start to break, and eventually it will break off. So that's an example of a series of events. But when we think about it from one singular event, sometimes the traumatic event is so serious, so severe, that I'm not putting on one weight at a time. I'm putting on immediately 1,000 kg weight. And the moment I put it on, the branch will snap. Right? So when we think about it from that perspective, sometimes there are, that trauma can be caused by little weights added on and on and on until it overwhelms the branch's ability or the person's ability to hold on. Sometimes the weight is so heavy that the branch snaps immediately. And when we think about it from that perspective, then we think about, okay, how come then there is a long-lasting adverse effect on the person's health, on the person's functioning, on the person's mental, psychological, social states. Yeah. So some of these events, right? Yeah, can be grief and loss, for example, can include grief and loss. When we think about losing someone, losing a loved one, that's a huge traumatic event. Losing a pet sometimes, right? Maybe not even losing a pet. Sometimes it could be losing a dream, failing O levels, failing A levels, right? Not getting into the secondary school of your choice. Those are losses of dreams. Yeah, in the COVID-19 situation, many people lost dreams, right? Because of the economic crisis, maybe also because of the inability to travel overseas for study, right? All those are grief and loss events. Then we think about the common ones that we are very used to thinking about: physical, emotional, sexual abuse, and those are examples of of things that we know will probably create trauma. Yeah, then we think about things like medical interventions. So one example of medical intervention is I have an uncle who is super afraid of going to the eye doctor. Reason being is that he has very high blood pressure. And very often, right, what happens is that his blood pressure will spike so high that the blood vessel in his eye will pop. And then his eye will fill up with blood and he cannot see. And this will carry on for like 2-3 weeks, If he doesn't go to the doctor and get it drained, right, he will have to sit in a very uncomfortable position to sleep until the blood slowly drains out of his eye over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks. And it's super uncomfortable. So the best way to do it is to go to the doctor, right, get it drained, but he doesn't want to. And the reason, I totally understand, right? The reason why is this, that he says this, that the way they do it is that they clip his eye open, right, his eyelid open, and they will put and you can see the needle coming all the way into his eye, right, and then draining the blood. It's super scary, and that's one example of medical intervention. Now another one would be maybe being hospitalized for a long period of time, the loneliness that you feel in the hospital. It could be, possibly when we think about like, interventions in mental health situations, being being restrained in the hospital. Yeah, that could be another example of a medical intervention, right? That can cause trauma. Yeah. Then we think about accidents, natural disasters. Accidents could mean like car accident, that kind of thing. Yeah, I have a friend who cannot turn her car right anymore. So she can't drive anymore. And because she can't turn right, she can't drive because she can only turn her car left, right? And the reason being is that when she just passed her driving license, she actually turned out and she was driving her dad's car, and she was turning right at the T junction, and someone beat the red light and hit her in the side. Yeah, and that caused a lot of emotional trauma. Yeah. So, that could be an accident. Natural disaster could include things like COVID-19. And one such example would really be the number of young people that are reaching out to us since COVID-19 began. Yeah. In 2019, there were 237 people who reached out to us. But after COVID-19 hit, we had 373 that year itself in 2020. And this year, right, also seeing the effects from it, we have more than 800 young people who have reached out to us already so far for mental health issues. Yeah, many of them, have trauma. So then we think about, abuse, neglect, witnessing acts of violence. Those are common things as well. Yeah. So the other question that I do get very often then is this, like, then how? Right? How come this person can go through this thing and this other person can go through the same thing? Then this other person is completely fine, and this person is, so affected by the trauma. And the reality is that all of us experience life differently and are buffered by different life experiences. So there's one example that I always give, of a client that came to us in 2019. This girl came to us and was experiencing many, many symptoms of trauma, right? And we were wondering why, and we found out from her that actually she got she went through this situation whereby she and her friend, were doing a group project with a poly classmate, and they were doing it in the poly classmate's house, this guy, right? And they decided after that they want to go and bathe and go out. Right, so they chose to use this guy's bathroom to bathe, and she was waiting outside, and her friend went in, and very quickly after the friend, while the friend was bathing, she suddenly stopped. She put on her clothes, and she came out and said, "Let's go." And the reason why was that she was holding on to a spy camera, right? And the interesting thing is that, the girl, right, the girl that was being recorded didn't have any symptoms of trauma. But the girl that was waiting outside had come to us with many, many symptoms. She kept having nightmares. She was afraid, of guys and all that. And when we think about it from that perspective, we are often affected by, number one, how did this experience happen to us? Right? How do we experience this? Yeah. Were we the person that's involved? Were we the victim? And like, how was it? How did we experience it? The next thing that also affects the how is how much resilience do we naturally have already? Yeah. how much resilience do we have? And that's affected by the way we are brought up, the experience that we have in our life and all that. Yeah. So the next thing is that when we think about it from how, we also need to think about it as from when. I mentioned experience earlier on. Yeah. But when also means that when a person is younger and experiences trauma, they are more likely to have longer term symptoms. They are more likely to be affected longer term. Yeah. So the when plays a huge part as well. Then where did this happen? Yeah, giving you, we'll bring you back to the example of the girl that can't turn right on the road anymore. No, she can't turn right when she gets into a car, right? But she can turn right riding a bicycle. So the where, right, plays an effect because of what she remembers from the incident. So where, right? The other part of where is, where was this? Was it supposed to be a safe place? My house, my room, the toilet, my school, my grandfather's house, right? These are all places and examples of places that are supposed to be safe. But when something happens in that safe place, our world comes crashing down. Yeah. And finally, when we think about it, we also want to think about how often did it happen. You know, some people can deal with it when it happens one time. But when it happens 5 times, when it happens 10 times, cannot manage it anymore. Yeah. It's like how some of us, right, we give up on certain subjects when we were in secondary school. I'm the perfect example of it. I give up my Chinese, right? And the reason why is that I feel like I'm so bad at it. And that's an example of trauma, by the way. It might be a very slight example of trauma, not a very severe one, but it's still an example of trauma. Yeah, because I keep getting battered down by my results. I try and try and try and try and try and fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. And when that happens, that response also affects that traumatic response. Yeah. So the effect of trauma can be conceptualized as a normal response to an abnormal situation, and we want to remember that. It has short and long-term effects. There are certain times whereby trauma doesn't last long. The effect of trauma doesn't last long, and we can go back to our normal daily life after a while. Yeah. It could also have long-term effects whereby we are affected for years and years and years to come. Yeah. It can affect our individual coping responses, our relationships, especially if the trauma comes from an interpersonal relationship, right? Or even developmental tasks when we think about someone who experienced trauma when they're young. It can also affect our physical responses. Like for example, if I got into a car accident, getting into a car again might give me physical reactions, like my heart beating fast, my hands start to sweat, right? Physical responses. It could affect our well-being. If I was assaulted, maybe I cannot sleep for nights and nights and nights because I have nightmares. I keep thinking I should have done this, I should have done that, right? It can affect our social relationships, especially if the trauma is interpersonal. I don't trust people anymore, right? I have trust issues, or even our spiritual beliefs. Why didn't God protect me from this, right? So the effect of trauma can be very, very real. Yeah. So there are some signs of trauma that we want to remember, and we think about it from the perspective of behavioral, emotional, and physical, and psychological. So one of the signs of trauma when we think about behavioral would be how I respond to people. I blow up when I get corrected, for example. I'm aggressive. I fight. I make a mountain or a molehill. Like big things, I make big things out of small things. Yeah. I am very resistant, right, to change or transition because I feel safe in whatever, in my environment right now. Yeah, I might be very protective of personal space. For example, right, if there are times whereby we try to give kids high five, right, and the response is not to give us a high five but to cover their head. And reason why is because they've been hit so many times at home that whenever an adult, right, wants to do this, it looks like I'm gonna get hit. Yeah. So, that's protective of personal space as well. We think about reckless or self-destructive behavior, usage of drugs, alcoholism, right? Sleeping around, right? These are all examples of reckless or self-destructive behavior. Also, not cherishing your life, right? I give one example whereby, one of the clients that we have like to run around in the car park, right? And run around in car park, meaning that she like to jump from one 4-story high ledge to another 4-story high ledge. So she does that because she feels like her life is not very, very meaningful. Yeah. And we think about frequently seeking attention. Maybe you need attention of people. Yeah, it could be I need attention of guys, as a girl. I could be I need the attention of girls as a guy, right? I mean, attention of the opposite gender or whichever gender I'm attracted to. Yeah, I need the attention of older people. That could be another thing. Or even reverting to younger behaviors. Yeah, like sucking your thumb and all that, wetting the bed. Now, another kind of trauma response will be the emotional/physical type, whereby we think about the common things that we think about, like nightmares, sleeping problems, right? Sensitivity to noise or being touched, right? The fear of being separated from people that you trust, and you could be very sticky to the people that you trust as well. When we think about also maybe not being able to trust other people, yeah, or building not able to build trusting relationships as well. Also maybe thinking about like feeling very sad, angry, overwhelmed. No, we think about it as mood issues, cognitive issues and mood issues, right? And then we think about unexplained medical problems, and the common one, right, the unexplained medical problem, right, is this. The most common unexplained medical problem is gut issues, right? Gut issues and chest pains, right? So when we think about it, gut issues, chest pains, can also be very common as well. So gut issue, one example is need to go toilet all the time. Yeah, need to poop all the time. Now, it's a normal natural behavior, I don't know if you guys are like me, but before exam I need to go toilet, and I don't know if you guys are the same, right? But it's the same, right? It's the same. So finally, we think about psychological, confusing what is safe and dangerous, because maybe I don't know what is safe and dangerous anymore. Could be I've gone through so many dangerous things, yeah, that I don't know what is real anymore. And sometimes this comes up especially in relationships. Yeah. So one example is having worked with quite a number of young people before. I have worked with a young lady, right, or a young girl who was sexually assaulted when she was in the club. And because of that, right, she she started to become very sexually promiscuous, because she said that whatever lah, I don't care anymore. Whatever's given away is given away already, right? So confusing what is safe and what is dangerous. Another example would be trouble focusing and concentrating, because so many things are going through my mind all the time. Yeah, and we think about a trauma, a brain that has been affected by trauma. A brain that's been affected by trauma has many trauma reminders, many memories. Yeah, and many things, right, can lead to those memories being reignited. Yeah, so when we think about trouble focusing and concentrating, it could be because where I am, right, is bringing back memories of that trauma experience and event. And finally, we think about difficulty, imagining the future. Often it's difficulty imagining a future that is positive, and I'm able to live without this traumatic reminder. Yeah. So some additional signs of trauma, we think about flashbacks, nightmares, always expecting something bad to happen. It could be like, wow, every time something good happens, I know something bad should happen one. Right? I've had a young person tell me that before. Then we think about not remembering periods of your life. Sometimes our brain tries to protect us from the event, and it just forgets or just locks away those memories. Yeah. Feeling emotionally numb as well, because I'm also trying to protect myself from the different emotions. Therefore, I just numb myself. We think about excessive watchfulness, excessive watchfulness, anxiety, anger, shame, sadness. And the reality, right, is very often when it is anger, unfortunately, a lot of time the anger is directed at herself. Why didn't I do this then? Why did I protect myself? Why did I do this? Why didn't I do that? Right? I have a client right now that I'm working, with regards to her trauma on being bullied in the office to the point whereby she almost took her life. Yeah. And right now, that, or not right now, but when we first started working together, there was a lot of anger, a lot of self-anger. Like, why didn't I stand up for myself? Why didn't I quit when I had the chance? Why did I do this? Why did I do that? And the anger, right, is directed at her, and I took a while, right, to help her realize that it's not her fault. Yeah. So there's all those additional signs of trauma as well. Yep. Now, when we think about it then, right, what does it usually come out with, and how do I tell? Right? So I've been talking about all these things, but a lot of these things can be hidden, right? But how do you tell, right, that someone may be experiencing a traumatic event, or maybe experiencing signs of trauma? Right? We think about it from fight, flight, and freeze. It's a natural human being response, right? It's a human response. And all of us naturally tend to lean towards one or the other, right? I know I lean towards fight, right? I lean towards fight because when I was very young, I know already from very young, I lean towards fight. Because during one of my night walks last time when I was a kid, right? Don't remember primary school, secondary school lah. But one of them, I was going through the night walk route, and then one of the instructors, it was an older student who came out, right? Came out and scared me, and my first immediate response without thinking, right, is to kick the guy in the groin. Right, so after that, I was banned from being the network participant by my school, and I was told to go and be the instructor, so, or to be the helper, the facilitator. Yeah, so I know that I fight. Right, some of us we fight, we flee or we freeze. Yeah, some of us we freeze like a deer in the headlights, right? So the reality is that when we think about fight, we are looking at anger, response with aggression, right? Responding to people, right, with those feelings of anger, aggression, sometimes fighting ourselves, getting angry at ourselves, hurting ourselves, those homicidal, suicidal, self-harm kind of feelings. Then we have also, those responses whereby every time there's a correction, every time there's advice given, right, their response is that they need to protect themselves and kind of like give a reason why they behave or did this thing, right? Even if they were correct, they were wrong, they will still try to reason it out. So those are fighting responses. Yeah, those are fighting responses. Then we think about fleeing responses, right? We think about avoidance being the biggest thing. I'm just avoiding every situation that could bring me to remember this traumatic event. And if the traumatic event happened in school, I just don't want to go to school, right? If the traumatic event happened at work, I don't want to go work, right? If the traumatic event happened, in at home, yeah, I don't want to go home. Yeah, so we have those examples, avoidant behavior. But we also have other examples of fleeing, meaning that they don't want to stay in one relationship, but they move on from one to the other, one to the other, one to the other. It could be interpersonal trauma, right? We think about another example of just running, running from one situation to another situation. Yeah, hopping from one friend group to another friend group. These are all possible flight responses as well. Yeah, not even turning up, ghosting people. Yeah, not getting into relationships because I'm afraid of getting hurt. Right? These are all examples of fleeing responses. Yeah. Then we think about freezing. Right. So freezing could be that, they just panic and they just stop. Panic, it could be another example. Right. Not being able to respond, not being able to say what's happening to them, saying I don't know, could be another freeze response. Yeah. So when we think about all those things, we also want to think about our impact in their life, as well as what could be making it worse. So the first thing is this early occurrence. Now we can't change any of that, right? If it happens to a young person, it happens to a young person. And especially, young people are more affected by traumatic events because they don't have the buffer of life experience to protect them. Yeah. So early occurrence does increase the impact of trauma. But what we can be involved in, right, would be, for example, can we help protect this person? Can we help to, be create that healing relationship early on in this person's life? Yeah. But next we think about like other factors increasing impact. Now this is where sometimes we come in, right? And sometimes we unfortunately exacerbate or make the impact worse, right? So one example is being silenced or not believed. So being silenced or not believed could be like, hey, you sure you're telling the truth or not? Right? You sure or not? Right? Saying those kind of words, right? The other thing is when we think about silencing people, it sometimes comes from the best intentions. Aya, you just broke up with boyfriend. It's okay lah. There are many fish in the sea lah. Don't worry about him lah. Yeah, that guy is a jerk lah. I'm so happy that you broke up with him. So you're actually silencing that person when they needed to talk about it. All right, think about it. Thinking about an adult, responding to a young person when they not the break up lah, but when they fail an exam, for example. It's okay lah, it's just an exam, right? You will look back at this and laugh, and you won't even remember it 10 years from now. But it doesn't matter because now is not 10 years from now, right? Right now, the entire world just crashed around them. Yeah, so we don't want to silence people by mistake or not believe them. Yeah. And neither do we want to blame or shame them. See lah, who asked you to go out in the middle of the night? Who asked you to go clubbing with a guy? Who asked you to go and do this? Who asked you to go and do that? Right? I tell you already, come back at 12 midnight. You never come back at 12 midnight. See lah, this happened to you. Right? So those are examples of blaming and shaming. Right? Sometimes in our, in our desire to protect or even help the person learn a lesson, yeah, we end up accidentally blaming or shaming them. Sometimes it could be a societal issue, or it could be a systemic issue. One example of that is this: that there was an incident 1 year ago when one of my colleagues brought client to a police station to lodge a report. Because what happened was that her nude photo was being leaked or was threatened to be leaked if she did not give in to this guy's sexual demands. And what happened next was that when she went to the police station, the police officer actually told her that, you sure you want to lodge this report? If you lodge this report, you are liable also. You can be liable of producing pornography. Right? And of course she didn't want to lodge the report lah. Right? She didn't want to lodge the report. At the end of the day, I lodged a complaint on her behalf, as an organization, from an organization's perspective, and eventually the police, did apologize to her and help her, help support her in that situation. But that can be a very shameful or blame-filled event. And if too many of these things happen, right, you can only see how this young person or this person starts to fall deeper and deeper into this traumatic experience. Yeah. Finally, we think about the perpetrator being a trusted caregiver. A trusted caregiver could be someone who is a family member, could be someone who is a trusted leader, a mentor. Yeah. These are all examples. Now, it does have an effect over our lifespan. Trauma does have an effect over our lifespan. We think about it. I will talk about this thing called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, later on, right? But I want to think about it from this perspective. Sometimes trauma is historical. Yeah, some behaviors are deemed to be okay, right, in a local or social context. Now I give examples for these two things, right? So historical trauma could be my parents were abused by their parents, who were abused by their parents, who were abused by their parents, therefore they abuse me, right? Because they think that this is the way to raise a kid. Yeah, that's historical trauma. Yeah, generational embodiment. Then we think about a social condition or local context. So maybe a particular culture thinks that it's okay to treat a young person like this, right? Therefore, everyone in this culture treats their kids like this, right? So that could be also a traumatic experience that happens in a local context. Yeah. Then we think about adverse childhood experiences. This is when childhood trauma maybe comes in, or maybe for yourself also, an adult trauma can come in here at this point in time. And if the person is still young enough or their brain is still developing, then it might affect their neural development. But even for adults, right? Even for adults, it can also affect our social, emotional, and cognitive development, or the way I respond in a social setting, the way I respond emotionally, and the way I respond with regards to my thinking and my feelings, right? So after which, sometimes when I think about it, right, reality is we always self-medicate. And self-medication for trauma, right, could be that I isolate myself. And that's one of the better ones already, right? I also like myself, and I don't talk to people because I don't want to get hurt anymore. Self-medication for trauma could be that, I do the complete opposite, and I try to make as many friends as possible. I become a social butterfly, but then I don't have any real relationships. Now, that's also another not so bad one already. Self-medication could be usage of drugs, alcohol, substances. It could be getting affection by sleeping around. It could be self-harm, thoughts of suicide. Those are self-medication as well. And very often we think about it at this point over here, mental illness also sometimes comes in. PTSD is the common one that you guys kind of think about when we think about trauma. But in reality, trauma can also lead to many other mental health issues. Depression is another common one, right? And even borderline personality disorders or personality disorders can be also very common when we think about traumatic experiences. Yeah. So eventually we think about all these add together. It could be also physical disease, could be mental disease, and eventually very often also in time early death as well. So adverse childhood experiences do affect our adult health, and in fact, trauma at a younger age affects adults. Trauma at adult age also affects adults, guys, right? But when we think about this, health risk behaviors are often coping mechanisms. Like I mentioned, symptoms are simply our normal responses in an abnormal situation. So what are ACEs? ACEs are actually the more common traumatic events, right, that young people face when they are younger. Yeah, and they can include abuse, physical, emotional, sexual. By the way, we in Singapore, we calculate physical and sexual, right? But we don't have any data on emotional abuse or neglect. But in actuality, emotional abuse and neglect are the most common types of abuse out there, emotional and psychological abuse. And recent data is starting to show that emotional abuse and neglect has even longer effect than physical abuse. So it's something that we kind of want to make sure that we're not part of as well. Yeah, we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So we also see and realize that many times, it's nobody's fault that the trauma happens. It could be someone in the household, a parent, a brother, a sister, an uncle, auntie, grandparent, right, has a mental illness. It could be that, that the parents are divorced, or maybe even not divorced, but someone passes away, one of the parents pass away. Could even be, the situation whereby the parents are working so hard to provide for the child that they are not even around. Therefore, to make ends meet, they inadvertently traumatize the children. Sometimes it's because of an aggressive and violent household whereby a mother, a sibling, even the person themselves is treated violently. Sometimes, we can include things like substance abuse as well in the family as well, or somebody gets incarcerated. So these are all examples of ACEs, right? Now, the thing about it is this, that some of us might think like, then what about us, right? So, the one of the places whereby you can go and do an ACE test is this website called safecircle.sg, which is actually also run by Limitless. And you can check it out there. right? You can try the ACE test for yourself there. I will be honest with you, my own ACEs, right, are more than 4. Okay, but what am I talking about all this, right? The reality is this, that in Singapore today, 2 in 3 people have reported experiencing some form of trauma in their past. Could be adverse childhood experience, could be something else, could be another form of trauma, right? But why am I saying this? Why am I talking about ACEs? The same study also showed that people in Singapore with 1 or more ACEs, 1 or more, have a higher chance of, contracting, some mental health issues, such as MDD, major depressive disorder, depression, right? Bipolar disorder, OCD, right? And or even thinking about suicide. People with 2 or more have a higher chance of experiencing all types of mental disorders. Yeah. So with that said, right, this is one thing that I do want to help us remember, that very often a traumatic event can lead to a mental health disorder. Therefore, we want to be part of the healing process before it becomes a mental health disorder. Yeah. So how do I do that? Right. So we want to think about it as a trauma-informed approach. Right. So what's a trauma-informed approach? A trauma-informed approach is an approach that emphasizes safety. I'm going to show you a list of things, right? And if you were in yesterday's session, you will have seen this exact same list because Celine and I did this together. Yeah. So when you think about it from this perspective, how many of us have responded according to the center column before? I am one of those people, right? Sometimes we give advice, sometimes we blame, sometimes we confront and scold, sometimes we moralize, we preach, we warn the person, sometimes we try to lecture them, right? Sometimes we try our best to interpret or analyze what's going on and then tell them like, hey, you're like that because of like that, right? But in actuality, those are not helpful responses. Yeah. The reality is that giving advice and doing all those things, these people will have experienced it before. But what we want to do is to be sensitive to their needs. A person who has experienced trauma, especially interpersonal trauma, right, will not trust another person, will not listen to another person easily, will not feel that, they are in the wrong, right? Because the reality is that it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. Yeah. So a trauma sensitive response would be one whereby we think about it from a perspective of confidentiality, right? When someone tells me something, I want to be confidential. I want to ensure that I don't tell other people unless they are at risk of hurting themselves. When someone is passive, I respect their need to be passive. But I also respect the fact that they probably know what's the right thing to do, and they're trying their very best. When someone is aggressive, instead of confronting them, yes, I know sometimes emotions come up, right? But we also want to be patient as much as possible, especially right if we are in a mentor or a teacher kind of position. Yeah. If someone is sarcastic, I would like to listen beyond the lines like, hey, what are you trying to tell me? Yeah, what are you actually trying to tell me? When you think about ambivalence, we want to share, and sometimes it's okay to share your own experiences as well. Share how what they're doing might affect you. Yeah. When we think about honesty, we also want to be honest with them. We want to be understanding. Sometimes what they're going through is difficult, and want to be understanding that there are even normal things can become very difficult for them. Yeah. When we think about someone who's feeling hopeless, we want to respond through empathy, right? We want to empathize with them. We want to be calm, right, and not be a part of the aggression that they experience, right? We want to have confidence and place trust in them. Yeah. To realize that very often they also want the best for themselves, but they are getting there. And we want to trust that they want to get better. Yeah. So Trauma-informed care, our response to someone who has trauma, is essentially, us emphasizing their physical, emotional, and psychological safety. I also, at the same time, want to emphasize my own emotional, physical, and psychological safety, right? I also want to create a sense or opportunities for them to be empowered and in control of their own situation. Yeah. When we think about it from a trauma-informed care perspective, right? I want to lower my own stress level, but at the same time, I also want to lower their stress levels. When I respond, when a stone hit a stone, right, there will be a reaction, right? Sometimes there's a spark. Sometimes you see parts of the stone chip off, right? We don't want to hit the stone with another stone. We don't want to knock heads with them. We want to respond to the stone by, being soft. We want to respond to the stone by being calm, by being empathetic. And that lowers their stress levels and lowers our stress levels. And by doing so, you help them not become so hard, right? At the same time, we also want to reduce the likelihood that someone who has experienced trauma will be overwhelmed. Therefore, one of the things we want to do is not re-traumatize them, right? Re-traumatizing essentially is this: asking too much about the situation. What do you go through in the past? Tell me more, right? I don't need to know that, actually, right? To help them, because like I said, we're not most of us here are not trained mental health professionals or therapists. Yeah. So we want to assist and support them in the moment. Yeah, not in the past, maybe not even in the future, but in the moment. And we want to ensure that it's a win-win situation for everyone. So that means, right, if you are supporting the person and you feel like you're being overwhelmed as well, remember, it should be a win-win situation. Therefore, you should not be giving up your own self-care and your own mental health to help and support someone else. Yeah. Finally, the last thing is this: that you don't need to be a therapist to be therapeutic, right? To be therapeutic essentially just requires you to be very empathetic. And one of the things that I always remember is this situation whereby a friend of mine, we we were going through school together at the same time. She was studying to be a counselor, studying to become a social worker. And I remember this story from her, I think it was about her own experience in her internship placement. And during that placement itself, right, this student at the family service center, right, was the only person available at that point in time. And this lady walked in, super distraught, was crying and overwhelmed and all that. And this girl didn't know what to do, friend of mine, right? So what she did was she sat down with this lady and she just listened. And she listened attentively. She responded with, I feel you, I hear you, it must have been really hard. She didn't do anything essentially, she just responded, right? But when the time came, much later, another social worker, her supervisor came out and took over the session. But at the end of the session, what the lady said is this: can I come back again? And the supervisor said, sure, of course you can come back again, right? And she said, can I request that I see this girl? Right? The reason why was because she was not doing anything particularly therapist, but she was just being very therapeutic. Yeah. And in that little situation of 1 hour, 2 hours, whereby she was just allowed to pour out her heart, right? This lady or this friend of mine made such a big difference in helping her. So, why should I practice this? I think we also want to realize that, number one, trauma is not uncommon in our society. But by being empathetic, by being therapeutic, we can lead to lowering the associated mental health issues that come from that experience of trauma. Now, when we think about it from the perspective of a young person, 1 in 5 young people experience a mental health issue. That's a higher percentage than the 1 in 7 to our general population today. And I want to be that, I want to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. we want to be a part of the environment whereby we can provide those supportive relationships to help these young people or help these people even around us, recover, I would say, from their traumatic experiences. Yeah. So how do I do it? Right? How do I do it? It will be through these 4 R's, right? So please remember these 4 R's. The first R is that I want to realize that trauma is actually not uncommon. That especially so, when we think about what 2 in 3 people, that means this, like when we think about audience today, 2 in 3 of us, even those that are here today, right, will have experienced some form of trauma in our past. How affected we are by it is a different story. But we also want to realize that if that is the case, then I want to make this empathetic response, this empathetic treatment of other human beings, right, a part of my own lifestyle. Yeah. The next thing is to recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in the people around us. So number 1, realize. Number 2, recognize, right? The signs and symptoms of trauma in the people around us. Yeah, we think about the fight, flight, freeze response. We think about the emotional responses, the psychological responses, right? The physical responses and the behavioral responses, right? Then we also, number 3, want to respond, appropriately. And number 4, resist re-traumatization. How do I respond and how do I resist? Yeah, so number 1, realize. Number 2, recognize. Number 3, respond. Number 4, resist. How do I respond? How do I resist? Right? We respond and resist by doing this. Number 1, we prioritize their safety. Right? Prioritize their safety, meaning their physical safety and their emotional safety. I don't want to, bring up this situation or have them talk to us in a place whereby they're unsafe. Right? If they are physically unsafe, I want to prioritize taking them out of that physical location, the environment that they're unsafe. Number 2, right? Are they also emotionally and psychologically unsafe? Meaning that what happens if I talk to them and open up this can of worms, right? And I'm not able to close it. So that's why I say focus on the now. Don't focus on the past. Don't focus on the trauma event until they are ready to talk about it. Yeah. So safety. The worst thing that we can do is to open up the can of worms and they go back, right? And they, like I said, self-medicate. Yeah. So next, we think about trustworthiness and transparency. I want to be trustworthy with them. I want to be transparent with them. If I'm going through a tough time, I want to let them know. If I've gone through a similar situation, I also want to let them know. I want to be authentic with that person, right? The other part of trustworthiness and transparency is that I want to be upfront with the boundaries that I want to set. It could be boundaries with regards to our relationship, meaning that don't call me at 12 midnight, right? I will be asleep, and I let you know first that I know I'll be asleep, right? I always put my phone on silent mode when I go to sleep. And if you call me 20 times, it doesn't matter. I won't hear one. Okay, that's one example of boundaries. The other boundary is this. It could be, when we think about it, if you are going to hurt yourself as a person who cares about you, I need to get someone else involved. All right, that's something that I must tell you. That's an example. Yeah. Next, we think about collaboration and mutuality. Let them make their own decisions together with you. Right? Make decisions together. Don't make decisions on their behalf. Yeah, as much as possible, don't make decisions on their behalf. Why? When we think about someone who has experienced interpersonal trauma, very often they were put in a very powerless situation. What we want to do through our relationship with this person is to help them realize that they have power to choose and they have power to act. Therefore, we want to empower them to speak up, to say that they have a voice, and to make certain choices. And that could mean this. Would you like to go and talk to a counselor? I can go with you. Would you like to go and make a police report? I go with you, right? You want to go and lodge a PPO against this person? I'll go to the court with you. right? Empowerment, voice, and choice. Would you need to take a year off from school? Now, I want you to know that as your parent, I will fully support that. Yeah. But we need to work towards a future together, lah. Right? So that's an example of having empowerment, voice, and choice. You know, peer support is very important as well, right? When we think about peer support, part of the core principles is, why I include peer support here is this, that if, someone who is, someone who is going through a traumatic incident or recovering from a traumatic incident, right, will likely also isolate themselves. But at the same time, they do need that human interaction. So the peer support essentially means this, that they are not left alone. Yeah, and finally, when we think about it, one of the, how do I help? Also, I also want to be very aware of the cultural issues, what's going on in their culture. It could be a racial or religious culture, right? And understanding what's going on, having them kind of tell us a little bit more, learning a little bit more about that. Because sometimes we give advice, or maybe not even give advice, we kind of cannot put ourselves in their shoes. Therefore, we can't understand their trauma. Yeah. The other thing is this: if they belong to, other types of culture, for example, they come from LGBTQ community, right? We also want to realize and recognize and even get educated about the common issues that their community faces, right? Therefore, putting ourselves in their shoes to support them as human beings, right? So, what does it take then, right? Number one, it takes, okay, let's talk about being authentic. It takes being authentic, right? It takes being authentic, it takes being real, letting them know that you see them as a person and you're not there to provide a solution. You're just there to be there with them, right? That you, a human being, wants to support another human being and you want to just be there for them, right? It's being authentic. Next is a way of being. Now, we realize that trauma happens to so many of us, right? We want this to be part of our lifestyle, right? The way I communicate with this person who I know has experienced trauma should be the same way I communicate with my colleague, with my friends, right? With my family members. I want it to be a lifestyle and a way of being, right? Because I don't want to inadvertently make anyone else's trauma worse, right? Unsaid or untold trauma. Next, I also want to be respectful to their own decisions. Ultimately, they are the experts in their own life, right? And they are the ones that ultimately, I would say, have to take responsibility for their own future, right? So we want to be respectful to their own decisions as well. But at the same time, also respectful that sometimes it takes a journey and it takes time for people to recover. Yeah. We want to be compassionate. Compassion is one level higher than empathy, right? Compassion is the deep desire to want to do something to help them, right? To take action to help them. Yeah. So when we think about compassion, it could be this, that I offer to do something on their behalf. I offer to go with them somewhere. I offer to buy them lunch. I offer to, talk to someone on their behalf. I offer to go with them to the psychologist or the therapist and talk on their behalf sometimes. Yeah, because I can say like, hey, it's very difficult for you, right? Why don't you okay if I kind of like just take notes of all the things that you've told me? Then if you miss anything out when we go seek help, right, I can say on your behalf, right? That could be another way. It takes a mindset shift. That sometimes, remember, like I mentioned, we get offended and get affected by people's traumatic responses to us. Yeah, but we also want to realize that symptoms are simply outgrowths of a traumatic event. Yeah, it takes constant attention and care now. Constant attention and care doesn't mean that, wow, you're there 24/7 you become their crutch. No, it means this, that when you open the door to them, I want to give them that constant attention and care for that period of time. Could be that, okay, it could be that when this person talks to me or tells me their problem, I set aside 15 minutes for them. I set aside half an hour for them. I set aside 1 hour to just sit down and just chill with them and be there for them, right? I remember this, when I was in poly, right? I had gotten into this huge major fight with my girlfriend. And what happened next, right, was that, we even reached a point where we said, 算了吧, right? Those people who don't understand Chinese, right? It's like, that's it. Right? Enough is enough. Let's take a break. And you know, that definitely affected me. It affected me for days and days, right? But I remember the next day after that big fight, it happened to be a Sunday. I was going to church, right? And I went to my church, and back then my church had queue, and I had to wait in the queue and all that, right? And I met this this youth leader, and this youth leader came up to me and said like, "Hey, Asher, you look, you don't look okay. Is anything wrong?" And what does that mean? That gave me the opportunity to say, I need to get this off my chest, right? So I unleash everything like, wow, tell everything, talk about the fight, to the point where I'm, clenching my fist. You can see the vein popping out inside my head, right? The vein coming out here, right? Holding back tears, right? Telling her everything. And then suddenly she told me, like just about 3 or 4 minutes in, hey, sorry, Asher, I need to go already. Wow, what's this? Right? Trust me, I never told her any of my problems again. I never went back to her, because I had an issue again. Why? Because I lost trust in that person. Constant attention and care means this, that if I text the person and say like, hey, you doing okay? I reach out to the person and say like, hey, you don't look okay. Talk about it. Constant attention and care simply means this, that I want to give them my time when I open that door. Yeah, it could be 15 minutes, it could be half an hour, it could be 1 hour, 2 hours even, right? I want to give them that time and protect that time. So therefore, right, it means that self-awareness is very important. I also want to be aware, can I give that person that time? Can I give that person that time? Okay, that one's very important. The second part of self-awareness is this: do I have the capacity and bandwidth to support this person right now? If I don't, I want to also be very honest about it, that hey, I'm going through something myself. Hey, I have an exam coming up. I have a deadline coming up. I have this thing coming up. I have this, that, and I also want to be aware that I'm struggling as well. I'm not in any place to support you. So self-awareness is that. It could be, to draw a line and say like, hey, I got this thing going on now, but maybe we can set aside time for breakfast next week or dinner next week, right? I'm also concerned about you. I want to be there for you, right? So we want to be self-aware as well. Yeah. And self-aware to the point whereby we also understand that sometimes people's trauma affects us. Sometimes we go through very similar things. And by them telling us what's going on, we also get affected. So if you are in that situation, there's nothing wrong with saying like, hey, it's not that I don't want to support you, but I went through something very similar as well. Yeah, and I'm also still recovering from that. You okay if we talk to someone else, right? Or I link you up with another person, or we go and seek help together, right? So these are some examples of being self-aware. Okay. Now, there are some places for help that you can connect with. The chat one is wrong. But we can look at the National Anti-Violence Hotline. Previously was Child Protection Services, whereby it's 1-800-777-0000. We can also look at the Child Protection Specialist Centers, whereby we think about Big Love, Heart at Failure, Safe Space. These are all for people who might be struggling with abuse and violence, right? If we want to talk to someone who can maybe do a better assessment of someone's struggles, we can talk about chat. Their website is www.chat.mentalhealth.sg. Chat.mentalhealth.sg, right? And of course, we can also talk to our partners. Some of you were here yesterday. You saw Celine. Celine comes from the Boys Town Clinical Intervention Center. You can talk to the Singapore Association for Mental Health. You can look at Think of Friend when it comes to like children under the age of 12, or for youths up to the age of 25, 12 to 25, you can come to Limitless. Yeah. So with that said, I've reached a point in time whereby I can ask you guys for questions, right? So now with that, if you guys kind of go home and you still have a bunch of questions in your mind and I didn't answer any of them, don't worry, I'll still be here on Friday, right? And you can go to padlet.com/outreach40/TLR masterclass, right? Once again, padlet.com/outreach40/TLR masterclass, right? And you can type in your question there. Yeah, and I'll answer it. I'll try my best to answer it on Friday. Yeah, so right now, if you have any questions, feel free to type it in the chat, right? Or even kind of unmute yourself and you can kind of ask me a little bit more. I'm going to stop the recording right now. So, if there are any personal questions, we don't end up recording them.